And it's one day to go before the US presidential election. And never in the history of journalism have so many highly paid, eloquent people ever been given so much airtime, so much space to explain that they actually haven't got the faintest, not the foggiest, not a Scooby. And those are the good commentators, the honest ones. There are plenty of blowhards and opportunistic poltroons claiming to know how America will vote when they plainly don't. So let's try and focus tonight on what we do know, or what we think we know, which is that America is now deeply tribal, divided between Trump-supporting Republicans and Harris Democrats, who don't merely disagree, but who can't stand each other, who believe the other tribe is a threat to the democracy of the United States itself. And because of that, it looks likely that there's going to be some trouble by the end of this week. Let us hope it is peaceful, but it may not be. I'm going to talk first to the highly experienced commentator and former speechwriter for George W. Bush, David Frum. David, very good to have you on the show. Having said that nobody knows what's happening, I'm shamelessly going to ask you what you think is going on.
I think, in a deep way, the same thing that has been going on every day, every year for the past 9 years, which is there is a coalition, there's a bloc that, to a greater or lesser degree, likes Donald Trump, some very enthusiastically, some less so. That's about 46% of the country. The enthusiasts are smaller, but the total group is 46, maybe a little more. And there's a coalition, a very diverse coalition, that opposes him for many different reasons, and that's an outright majority of the country. In American politics, majorities don't always win, but majorities usually tend to prevail. And so my guess for 2024 is the same as happened in 2020, what didn't happen in 2016, which is that the larger side will win. In 2016, of course, the larger side lost.
And that's Kamala Harris. You've written a very eloquent piece in The Atlantic, David, in which you've said that it's very unlikely that Trump, even if he wins the presidency, will win a majority of the votes, looking at the numbers, but that he would then try to exercise quite hardline policies on deportation and camps for migrants and all of that, which would be very, very difficult for the American people then to accept. If he wins and does that, how do you think democratic America is going to react?
Well, I didn't just say that I don't think he's going to win a majority. I don't think he's going to win a plurality. That is, I think he will win fewer votes. Whatever the Electoral College does, he will win fewer votes than Kamala Harris, as he won fewer votes than Joe Biden, as he won fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. And I think the reason I keep pedantically stressing this is people tend to use the language Trump won to suggest that Trump speaks for the larger share of the American public. And he never has, not one single day. Now, if Trump comes to power, by means of the Electoral College in 2024 and 2025, his very first priority is going to be to shut down the legal system because he is in terrible legal jeopardy. Right now, there are 4 cases, 2 federal, 2 state, that threaten him with criminal jeopardy. Plus, he has, of course, many, many civil jeopardies. And he has to stop all of that from happening. Now, presidents, until very recently, until the Supreme Court spoke just earlier this year, have not had the kind of immunity that Trump wants and needs. So he's going to try to force that through. But yes, the Supreme Court just made up a doctrine by which he could acquire very suddenly, unlike all his predecessors, criminal immunity. But I'm not sure that Congress will agree. I'm not sure the American people will agree. So the outlook, I think, is for a great deal of protest in Congress and outside, a great deal of chaos, a great deal of upheaval. I think he will have trouble finding competent people to staff his administration because they don't want liability for themselves. I think the outlook for a Trump presidency, if we have one, is not the consolidation of power, but chaos and paralysis.
Very interesting. And if things go the other way, if by the end of this week, Donald Trump has failed in the Electoral College, failed to become president, but perhaps narrowly, what happens again? Do we see another insurrection, do you think?
We have had some violence. We always have violence in American politics, but it's really important to notice that in 2020 and 2021, the violence was not a spontaneous thing that happened at the grassroots. We didn't have men going to shopping malls with guns. We had a directed insurrection by the head of the government. And many of the people who follow Donald Trump believed they were doing the right thing because they were obeying the president. They were a little fuzzy on the distinction between obeying the president and obeying the law, but that's an important distinction. But Donald Trump won't be the president in 2025. He won't be able to, for example, withdraw protection from Congress. There will be a president who will protect Congress. He won't be able to say, your president is asking you to come. It'll just be the loser of the election is asking you to come. Violence will look obviously illegal in a way that to Trump supporters, it did not look obviously illegal in 2025. In 2021, I beg your pardon.
Well, that is a relatively comforting analysis there, David. What about, you've also mentioned the possibility of assassination, particularly by some kind of lone actor, as something that worries you in the weeks and months ahead.
I didn't say assassination. I said people taking guns out and shooting. No, that's an important...
Depends what they were shooting at, yeah.
Yeah, but American violence, look, the characteristic American political crime is kind of weirdly non-political. It's Hinckley shooting Reagan to impress a movie actress. That we have a lot of that in this country. People acting for weird motives that aren't exactly aligned with regular politics. We don't have much of a tradition, and we didn't have till Trump, of kind of political violence that lined up with conventional political categories. That didn't tend to happen very often. And it's really important to stress, in 2021, it happened not from the bottom, but from the top. It was not ordinary people saying, I want to go shoot somebody. It was the sitting president saying to his followers, come shut down Congress so I can steal this election that I tell you was stolen from me.
Let me ask you, if you don't mind, about some of the policy issues. We've talked on this program a lot about the impact of a second Trump presidency on Ukraine and Putin. Yeah. But what about the impact of it on tariffs and world trade? Because certainly he's talking about 20% tariffs on British goods coming into the United States, never mind the 60% on Chinese ones.
It's always important to keep in mind those things the president can do on his own and those things he cannot do on his own. Tariffs are something the president can do on his own. The Constitution awards power over tariffs and trade to Congress, but since the 1930s, Congress has delegated enormous powers over trade to the president, and he may have to come up with some pretext like invoking some kind of trade emergency, but Trump can impose a lot of heavy tariffs. The one thing that never seems to occur to him is that other countries will retaliate. So Trump will say, if we impose the tariff, the other country pays it. Now, that's economically illiterate. It's not true. You pay it. But let's say he's right. Let's say the other country does pay your tariffs. When they impose tariffs on you, who pays those? By Trump's own logic, the Chinese tariffs that are certain to follow will cost Americans. In fact, it's the other way around in both cases, but it really doesn't matter because what you get is a spiral of downward shrinking world trade of a kind that we saw in the 1930s, where tariff follows tariff, country retaliates against country, and the whole world is poorer.
We don't like talking about the 1930s under any circumstances. David Frum, thank you very much for talking to me at LBC tonight. Now then, let's get the view from the Harris side of the argument about what might follow a close result. Brian Brokaw is the former manager of the Kamala Harris campaign for California Attorney General and the U.S. Senate. Brian, great to have you on the show. This is a very tense moment, I think, for Americans of all political views. What do you think follows if your candidate, Kamala Harris, wins by a whisker and becomes U.S. president? How do you think that Mr. Trump and, above all, people like Elon Musk and J.D. Vance are going to respond?
Well, forgive me, perhaps this doesn't make for the best radio content, but I'm an optimist, and I actually agree with most of everything that your previous guest just stated. I think one, this is an incredibly close election. I also think that Kamala Harris is going to prevail, and I think it will end up being not as close as perhaps some of these last-minute polls seem to indicate that it will be.
Oh, really?
Now, will Donald Trump accept the results? Will his supporters accept the results? I have zero confidence whatsoever that they will, but I don't think it will matter. And at a certain point,
really?
I think, I believe
a lot of very angry, tooled up Americans seems to the outside world to matter quite a lot.
Well, again, like I said, I'm trying to be an optimist and not a doomsday person. I think the calls for political violence. I think those are both incredibly dangerous, but also to a certain extent overblown. I saw what the former president said yesterday regarding, if people were to try to shoot him, they'd have to shoot through the press. Now, I just think we have a tendency to get ourselves so worked up. And this is, to me, the fundamental problem with Donald Trump and his existence. He is a cancer on our political process. He makes his supporters act in ways that no decent human would ever be. And in turn, many people on the opposite side of the aisle feel like we have to react in kind. Now, the calls for violence, again, I think while those do make headlines, those are few and far between. And I hope and honestly pray that after we have an outcome tomorrow, we can start to get back to a politics that is just frankly more boring and not constant, fodder for the news media and for the Twitter crowd. Yeah.
Brian, you've said a couple of times you're an optimist, and honestly, I don't mind that. We don't mind optimism on this show, but I'm going to press back a little bit because it is also possible, we both know this, that Donald Trump could win this week. He could get a majority through the Electoral College. In those circumstances, if he wins a majority in the Electoral College but has a minority of votes cast, in other words, you have won in terms of the actual number of votes cast, and he then, for instance, sets up internment camps and uses the army to round up migrants. How do you think, as it were, blue Democrat America is going to respond to that?
I hate to even entertain a hypothetical such as that. However, we have lived through a Trump presidency before, and I think we saw that not just Democrats, but just frankly decent Americans stood up against him when he was acting far beyond what anyone would have ever expected of a president of the United States. I have no doubt that if and when it came to a second Trump presidency, we would work in kind. At the same time, the Republican Party itself has to realize that there will soon be a day, 4 years from now, if not tomorrow, where you are in a post-Trump Republican Party. And there is no other figure like him in that party or in the country. They have a whole bunch of people who are wannabe mini Trumps, but the laws would apply to them in a way that Donald Trump has managed to skirt by. And so what I'm going to look at, just as much as what happens tomorrow, is how the Republican Party starts to plan for a post-Donald Trump party.
All right. Brian Brokaw, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And remember, please, to stick with LBC for the coverage of the election throughout the week. Sheila Fogarty and John Sopel will be guiding you through the night's twists and turns with America Decides tomorrow evening from 10 p.m.